All right. Well, good morning, Ken. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much for joining us. And thanks to Ask Committee for organizing this wonderful event. Um, so, looks like I can see the audience list is very small. The way we want to do this is, Ken, just keep it a very free-flowing discussion and not perhaps try to put structure around it. But nonetheless, let's start with a quick introduction about ourselves. Would you mind going first, Ken?
Sure. My name's Ken Lane. I'm the chief evangelist with Postman. Some folks might also know me from my blog, API Evangelist. And I just study the technology, the business and politics of APIs. And I'm happy to be here to talk about API discovery and governance with you.
Thanks, Ken. And I am Baljeet Malhotra. I'm the founder and CEO of TeejLab, a cybersecurity company focused on API risk management. And discovery is a really very important part of API management in general, but more so from a governance perspective, discovery is really the starting point. So, Ken, very much like to enjoy the discussion with you, but let me start with the very basic question. What are APIs
Wow.
in this modern API economy?
Yeah, I mean, an API is an application programming interface in a more technical sense, but from the impact it makes on all of us in our personal and professional lives, I would say it's what connects all of our mobile devices to the cloud, to the internet. It's what connects all of the apps that we use, from Facebook to Twitter to YouTube to Salesforce. All of these platforms have APIs behind them that allow the information and data that we're exchanging with them to be passed back and forth. And so almost all of these applications are using APIs. Just companies have different approaches to how they expose those, make them available to developers, and allow access to those resources.
Yeah, and I hope you excuse my question simply because, a lot of prospects and customers and researchers and students I talk to, sometimes I'm surprised. It's not very uncommon in those discussions. People ask questions, especially not with the technology background. What are APIs? Because the APIs standards have evolved, API technologies have evolved, people's understanding about APIs have evolved. So I think a lot of questions I faced in those meetings and discussions is, tell us what's your definition of API. Now, I think the discussion and you and I, Ken, when we connected a few months ago, we talked about why the API discovery is a problem that has been long ignored before, but has really picked up in the recent, I would say last few years or so, simply because the volume, the number of APIs that have increased have really made this problem very difficult and also important for enterprises. Now, before even I try to attempt to, go into discovery piece and the governance piece, tell our audience, what do you understand from API discovery? I read your thoughts back in 2013. I was doing research back in 2012, 2013 kind of time frame as well, independent of each other. We were looking into some of these discovery issues from an enterprise perspective. But today, just share your thoughts around discovery as a concept. What does it mean to you, and why the community should pay attention to this?
Well, like APIs, I mean, there's many types of APIs. They come in all shapes and sizes. What discovery means, or finding those APIs, and the motivations for why you want to find an API are vary a lot. So if I'm a developer and I'm looking to find an API, to build something on, I tend to be Googling or looking for something on the web. I use programmable web is a API directory that came out, I think it was around 2005. And people use that to find public APIs. But I would say around the same time, in 2005, 2006, a new approach to delivering APIs called API management kind of came out and started evolving. And this really became about how do you manage the APIs that you have? And a big part of this is having a catalog of here's all of our APIs, and those are usually internal APIs. So programmable web is external. API management catalogs tend to be internal, and that's really how APIs are found today. For good or bad, I would say not a lot has evolved. Really, Google and programmable web is how you find public APIs. Your internal API management catalog is how you find those, internally within your organization. And over the last 15 years, not a lot has evolved really. But as you said, the number of APIs have grown because our mobile devices, every one of those icons on our homepage of our mobile phones have APIs behind them. So the number of APIs has just exponentially grown, and the number of software that we use in our organizations that have APIs has grown. Zoom, which we're on right now, has an API behind it. And so these APIs are growing and increasing, but the tools and practices for helping us find these and make them discoverable. So if I own an API, I want people to be able to discover it. That's good. If I need an API, I'm an API consumer, I want to be able to find that API. So really, API discovery, the need has grown. It's growing more and more critical each year. But really, the practices haven't changed in over a decade. But the last couple of years, I think we're starting to see it become a big enough problem that we're starting to see some solutions emerge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if I can add on top of that is the definition of discovery has extended beyond just finding APIs, either on repositories or marketplaces. But at TeejLab, we are looking into things like, discovery does not necessarily mean that finding an API, but, finding the underlying security issues, finding or discovering the compliance issues. We'll go into a little bit later about the governance aspect, but a lot of things in the past were focused on just finding those APIs from different marketplaces or Googling them. But I think it's really, really important that we evolve this definition moving forward. I actually really love to share your story once you shared in one of the fireside chat, and I think this is very inspirational to some of my students at least. Your experience when you build a bunch of APIs of a university website and how they were about to call FBI on you. So that is also, I consider, an example of discovery. These guys, they did not even know all the data underlying those websites can be exposed through APIs. I don't want to delay the discussion around governance aspect, but maybe this could be a very interesting story once again to share with the audience. What was that experience when you started looking into this discovery issue when people did not even know, the underlying APIs were there and the data was being exposed?
Yeah, so the story was I think it was 4 or 5 years ago now, but I do a lot of work with large enterprise organizations, institutions, government agencies that have come to me and said, hey, where do we get started with APIs? We want to do APIs. I'm like, well, I can guarantee you're already doing APIs. You're already providing them, you're consuming them. The software you and vendors you're using have APIs. There's APIs in operation. You're just not managing and organizing them. You don't know where all of them are, which really speaks to, I think, the scope of this API discovery challenge. And so this one in question was a University of Oklahoma. It was just someone, one of the, I think it was a professor there or someone who worked in administration asked me, where do we get started? And I said, hey, I have this script that I run that kind of scans your institution's website. And it'll tell me like where you're already sharing spreadsheets, CSV files, You have HTML pages, you have XML and JSON files. You have all these things that are pretty much APIs and can be used, are being used as APIs, but you're just not managing them and organizing or auditing and governing those. And so I said, hey, let me turn this on. I'll run it for a couple of weeks and I'll produce a list and I'll publish it to GitHub. And it'll point you to all of these resources you're already sharing internally and externally. And you can start there. That should be where you start with APIs, is just get your house in order. And so I ran it, published this list, and they said thank you. And then I didn't hear anything back. And I really hadn't put much thought in it. And then about 4 or 5 months later, I got a call saying, hey, would you like to have a conversation with the IT leadership at the university? I said, sure, of course. This is great. And they said, hey, we got on the call and they said, hey, this is great. We got this list on GitHub. And we were concerned when we first found it. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, because there's a lot of private data on here. There's a lot of personally identifiable information, budget data, things that should not be public. And we thought you had hacked our systems and just dumped it onto GitHub. And I said, oh, no, this was all public, crawlable. It's linked somewhere off your website. I didn't hack anything. I just crawled your existing website. But yeah, we figured that out. And our first response was to call the FBI on you. But then once we thought about it, we kind of read your story. Luckily, you had published a story about what you did, kind of walking through it all. And we realized that it was our error. And we needed to educate folks more about proper sharing protocols around data and information. And I said, you know what you need is a standard API strategy for how you publish APIs, make them discoverable so that you can govern them and understand them. And this, I don't want to call out the university. This is common. This is almost every large enterprise organization I talk to. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's kind of the state of things. And I think this is perfectly sets up moving us into the governance conversation, is because you can't govern and manage, secure, and do anything with all, have a strategy if you don't know where all these things are. And that's why discovery is so critical. And as you said, discovery needs to expand beyond just, hey, I'm a developer, I need to find an API, or hey, I'm an API provider and I want my API found. API discovery is a security, privacy, compliance issue, first and foremost. And that's how we need to address this.
Yeah, no, this is really fascinating. And I have a similar story from the enterprise world. It's not fancy enough like yours. FBI was about to be involved. But my story was more about, we were at a large enterprise. We were buying a company. And when we bought the company, we couldn't fit the company's product for the next 2 years simply because we had no idea, what APIs were being called. And believe it or not, thousands of APIs to the order of 5,000 and above APIs in a single product. No idea which vendors, free limits, open APIs, whatnot. So I'll keep the story short there. But just very interestingly enough, you said very, very important. There is nothing to be ashamed about. We just an hour, 2 hours ago, my team did a presentation at York University, and we're just telling them the risk for academia. Being a student or researcher, you think, oh, I'm safe sitting in academia. You could be safe, but still, there could be a lot of issues that you're creating for your organization. So really reminder, and I think that's a very, very interesting and I would say very encouraging statement, and the community should learn from it. There is nothing to be ashamed about it. That's where you start, and you start to manage your risk from there. Now let's get into the real nuts and bolts of this talk or the discussion, which was about governance. I'm going to start again with a very basic question. What is governance to you, Ken?
Well, it's being able to, I think, effectively govern how APIs are created, how they're delivered, how they're supported, the full life cycle of APIs, which are the bedrock for all of our web, mobile, and device-based applications. So with APIs being that kind of foundational aspect, having a consistent way for how we deliver, manage, and operate and support these is super critical. And so a lot of people think about governance when you say API governance, the design of the API. And I think that's the start where most people want to start, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. So as you mentioned, API discovery can involve finding APIs on GitHub and in Git repos. And so having a consistent strategy for how you govern, you deploy code around APIs, whether it's server side or client code, what repos those go into, what's exposed, are keys put into that code and those repos. There's just a lot of downstream implications of doing APIs without a strategy. So API governance for me starts with the design of the API, but really it's about holistically having a strategy for how we approach the entire API lifecycle. And again, discovery being the kind of the cornerstone of all that. You can't govern what you don't know about. And so governing begins with discovery, but it's an ongoing thing. Discovery is always ongoing because, as you know, most enterprise organizations are just moving forward at lightning speed. They're not always registering those APIs properly in the catalog. They're just building them for a mobile app and they need to get it out the door. So having the ability to auto and discover APIs in real time as part of your governance is a big part of that overall strategy.
Yeah, I think this is right on dot. And another aspect that I want to touch upon, I'm just keeping an eye on the watch, before we lose track of the time. Now, this is a specification conference, right? It's a standard conference. Standardization and specifications are very, very important for API governance. Maybe very quickly share your thoughts. What is the role of specifications in API governance? And then I want to quickly jump onto the topic of how different standards, either FHIR standard or other kinds of standards we were talking just the other day, what role do they play? Do you start with bottom up, converging to a standard and eventually your governance falls into place, or you start with governance and adopt certain standards? So you can approach in multiple ways. So start with your thoughts on the importance of standards and specifications in governance, and then move on to some of the standards that are important that help you with the governance.
Yeah, I mean, standards like OpenAPI, JSON schema, async API, these are machine readable definitions of the surface area of an API, the request and response structure, the objects that are passed back and forth, that's your JSON schema usually. And so these specifications are very much the seeds of API discovery. So if you don't have your APIs defined and mapped out, you can't find them, you can't discover, and you can't govern them. OpenAPI is how you map that landscape. It's how you describe the surface area of what's possible with each API. And your OpenAPI definition, your JSON schema, is how you're going to build that catalog. It's how emerging API search engines are going to discover public APIs, is by consuming those open API and JSON schemas. So those specifications really feed into the discovery piece. It's how we're going to find APIs. It's how you and I are going to have a conversation about an API. If I give you and say, hey, we have this new API, it's a products API. You don't really know what that means beyond it just being a products API. But once I give you an open API or point you to it in the catalog, then you have a much more nuanced, detailed version of what that API is capable of doing. And then from there, we can start documenting. We can start creating tests from those API specifications. We can generate client-side code. We can do security scans. We can start doing all these other things, these lifecycle functions that help us govern and operate our APIs in a sensible way. So API specifications are key to the discovery piece, but it's also key to standardizing how we communicate and operate our APIs, so that security tooling, if I can upload my open API, or if it can be discovered by my security tool, and then it automatically knows the surface area of my API, that's because I'm using a standard. that security process is less cumbersome. Same for monitoring, same for performance, same for compliance. So if I'm using these standards, each of these aspects of governance are going to become much more efficient, much more agile, nimble, and I'm able to do them across the organization. Where if every API across my enterprise is a special snowflake, some of these processes are still doable, but they're going to become much more cumbersome.
Right. So this is very insightful, Ken. Maybe another thought I have in my mind is I've been interacting with a lot of our enterprise customers, and it's not easy for different enterprises in different industries or business groups to converge to a single standard. So all these standards are coming up. There is an open travel group, there is perhaps open banking group, and all those standards are there. Do you see that the fragmentation of standardization, these industries, will eventually solve the problem in those specific verticals, or you see perhaps at some point in time, magically, there will be a global standards emerging from these standards that will help the industries move towards a handful of standards, if not a single standard?
I think
maybe you can give example of fire standard for medical industry or some of the other examples you have, and what's the relationship between those communities and how this helps with the governance?
Well, I would say this is a juncture that the Open API specification is at. Is Open APIs is that universal API standard for HTTP 1.1 APIs, so RESTful web HTTP APIs. Async is the sister specification for other TCP WebSockets, event-driven, message-driven APIs. And so these are global standards for how you can describe the surface area and what's possible with APIs. Now, for the industries and for the specific verticals, you can describe a specific industry standard using Open API or Async API. And you mentioned an example, the fast healthcare interoperability resources, or FHIR. And the FHIR specification, it's in the healthcare in the US. This is government and industry led. It's a common specification for digital healthcare records and being able to share patient information with hospitals. And so it's an industry level specification that exists in an Open API, which is a universal specification. And the same exists for banking right now in the financial sector, but primarily in Europe right now with PSD2, Payment Services Directive, and this is version 2 of it. So there again, you have a specific vertical specification, PSD2, that says what you can do as far as a bank with payments, credit cards, account information. But it's described in a universal API specification using Open API. And these are, so the standards help define it, help with discovery, help with governance, but both of those take the kind of governance to another level because PSD2 is a European Commission regulatory specification. Banks have to do it in Europe to be compliant. FHIR in the US has recently become, if you do business with the Center for Medicaid and Medicare or Health and Human Services across all 50 states, you need to have a FHIR API in the next couple of years. So we're seeing that regulatory piece come into play. So it's standards based, helping you with the discovery and the governance, but then it's got that industry level guidance and it's got that federal level kind of regulatory push behind it to make sure it happens.
Yeah, okay. This is really getting into the next question I had that I wanted to discuss with you. By nature, inherent nature of APIs, they're global, right? You can have standards, and eventually the reason why you need standards and governance tools or processes in place is so that these APIs become part of a larger ecosystem, and you can, create services around it. Where do you see the global challenges in terms of these APIs are truly become global products? I mean, I would not go as far as saying that the medical data of a U.S. patient might be required in European jurisdiction, but you could see in the banking scenario these things could be possible in the future, where credit checks and people moving from one country to another country. I mean, one of the challenges the banking industry faces. Banks do not share credit ratings, and that causes them millions and billions of dollars in bad credit and things like that. So my larger question in this context is, do you see any hope that these standards or governance process in place will be able to help the larger API economy? You can talk about standards, you can talk about other processes. What are your thoughts around from a global perspective as API as products?
Yeah, I think it'll vary from industry to industry. Like you said, banking, there's probably a lot greater opportunities there. And you see this happening in emerging markets and I would say same with communications, that when you have markets that are growing fast and don't have a lot of existing infrastructure, there's a lot more opportunities when it comes to payments, telco, whatnot, because those are kind of greenfield. And so those will move fast. But I would say the biggest challenges are going to be, we're localizing for specific business sectors, but we're not localizing for certain geographies and cultures and languages. We're not localizing APIs at that. So that's going to be, I think, the biggest friction point is right now there's kind of a colonizing effect from a lot of technology and APIs. And as technology, the internet rolls around the world, it comes up against a lot of, the internet in China is different than the internet in the US. The internet in Germany is different. So I think that the cultural, the language, these are going to be a lot of the big challenges we face. But we've got a lot of standardization to do at the industry and vertical level, I think, before we really start coming up with solutions there. So this is a long road. I've been doing this a decade now, and I see myself doing it for another 10 or 20 years before we really start finding solutions at a global level that are as smooth as we all see in our head when it comes to the API economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you on that. At least I envision myself spending rest of my life solving these problems. And we are not even talking about some of the futuristic problem like what's the role of standards and specifications in API biasing issues and some of the other governance challenges. So governance is going to go beyond legal compliance, security compliance, the other laws of the land compliance. It's going to go much more beyond that. So I think our journey moving forward will be very, very interesting. I just want to have a quick check with the organizers. I'm not sure if Celia can hear us. How much time do we have actually? Ken, do you remember?
Yeah, I think this is it. I think that's all we got. I think we probably should wrap it up. I think it was a 30-minute.
Okay, all right. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go back to our very first slide. Looks like I forgot to put our email addresses, but I think everybody, at least we have some colleagues on the call, they know you, they can Google about you and they can Google about Postman. It's very common. And also about us too, by Googling TeejLab or Baljeet Malhotra. I'm the founder and CEO of TeejLab. And once again, Ken, who is the chief evangelist at Postman. Thank you again, Ken, for joining. Any last minute thoughts for the audience?
No, thank you. I mean, I think this is a great conversation. I look forward to we're going to be continuing this. I know you and I at the spec level, API, governance and discovery at the spec level, but governance and discovery at each of these industry levels. We're doing a lot in the healthcare and fintech space. So, tune in at API Evangelist and TeejLab's blog and Postman's blog, and we can continue having this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you, Ken, once again, and thank you, audience, for joining us. And thank you, organizers, committee members for this opportunity. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.